Hello, and welcome to the Seattle Coffee Gear Podcast. I am your host, Pat, and joining me this week is Travis from Counterculture. How is it going?
Not bad, Pat. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I'm so excited that you're here. This is like the coolest because, you know, the goal when I got the permission to do this podcast was to eventually do this stuff and have like two people, same room, talking about, you know, coffee and machines and whatever else comes to mind. And so it's exciting to have you here because this is like the first time we've really been able to do it. So
yeah,
I am pumped.
I really like being in this space. This is a very cool little recording space you got. So very happy to apparently be the first one to come inside.
Yeah. Jake and I have recorded an episode in here like with all the lights off and podcasting mic instead of the camera setup. And it was frankly not the best. So it's really nice to have like, you know, we have video person here filming everything.
Live studio audience.
Yeah, we've got lighting. It's awesome. So it's super exciting. And like if you're listening to this when it goes up, there's going to be something that we're going to do with the video. We're not sure if we're just going to put the whole episode up on the channel or cut it up and do some stuff. So stay tuned to the YouTube channel if you want to see some of the visual aids we've got and see the setup with the space. So yeah, it's really cool. So I've got a bunch of stuff to talk about because Counterculture is a roaster we've worked with forever, and there's tons of things we can hit on. But every time we used to do an episode, I always ask, is there anything like coffee-wise, whether it's something at Counterculture or something completely different that you've been hitting in the last few weeks that you're into?
We recently started teaching Specialty Coffee Association curriculum at all of our training centers around the country.
That's awesome.
This is a really big deal for me because I've been the educator for Counterculture here in Seattle for the last 5.5 years. You know, we've got training centers in lots of different cities around the country, you know, and so Seattle is one of these places where we have one of these in Pioneer Square. Come check it out. But for the longest time, you know, we've taught classes that were our own curriculum that we wrote. We had our own certification pathway with a couple different levels and stuff. And all that stuff is really cool. And it's really fun being able to invest in baristas and kind of get people to kind of like level up like that. Mm-hmm. But the issue is just the fact that like coffee is a globally traded product. You know, specialty coffee is something that's absolutely around the world. Counterculture has worked with the Specialty Coffee Association in a number of different ways over, you know, the years and stuff. And so they do have their own curriculum pathway. There's an SCA diploma that you can get, mm-hmm. and then it has different kind of like, what's the right word? Pathways, coffee skills pathways within that. And so right now we're teaching the barista like skills pathway. We'll be teaching the sensory one later, but it's just a really cool curriculum because the fact that it's all number one based on research. So we have like bibliographies for every single like fact that we teach and then test. And just the fact that it's a global organization, I think is just kind of supersedes a lot of the like, you know, as an American-based company that teaches in America pretty much exclusively, we have our kind of our mindset of what coffee is supposed to be, what brewing is supposed to be, right? And there's regional variations and stuff. Obviously, you know, some places call it a shot in the dark, some places call it a depth charge. What do y'all call a coffee that's espresso on top of brewed coffee?
Man,
red eye, black eye.
Yeah, I've usually called it black eye, I think. But we had when I worked as a barista in Ann Arbor, Michigan for a number of years, and I can't remember now what. I think we just called it like a dirty drip or something because it's like a dirty chai.
Oh, sure.
But with drip.
I've never heard that.
I think that's what we called it. But it wasn't. We didn't even have like a formalized term. It's just what everybody started calling it because
that's cool.
We were all working there, and we didn't even at that point. I didn't even know what the Specialty Coffee Association was.
I've never heard dirty drip, but that is so logical.
Yeah.
We got a dirty chai. Of course, it's a dirty drip.
Exactly.
And that's just fun to say.
Yeah.
So we got this curriculum that we're starting to teach. It's really super fun. We have like classes because it's also one of those things where now we have classes that are open not just to the baristas that work at the like coffee shops that use Counterculture, but mm-hmm. like we have classes that are kind of open to everybody. So that's the big thing that's kind of like been new and on our plate, and there's a bit of a splash with that. And it's honestly like it just took hours and hours and hours of classwork for me to become an approved SCA trainer.
Yeah.
So it's just that's a pretty novel kind of thing. And as someone who's kind of like #lifelong learner, like I just really enjoy that part of being like, I have this new curriculum that
that's awesome.
It's great. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that anytime there's like new potential for responsibilities on my plate here, I'm like, what classes can I take to learn about this now?
There's so much fun stuff out there. And like it's such a big world of coffee. And you get really used to kind of the ways that you brew and the ways you think about coffee, but it's just a really fun thing to be like, yeah, we need to come up with like a definition that's inclusive of like Italy, but also Australia and like also Scotland. And these are very different places, but they all have like really cool coffee cultures and stuff. So
Yeah,
I think it's
absolutely.
great. Yeah.
That's really cool. And are those programs something that you would have like anybody could walk like can I say I want to come and take this class at the that's awesome. That's really cool.
There's like an intro class which kind of covers
Yeah.
like roasting and brewing and green buying and like some supply chain stuff, and that kind of is like a really good like overview of everything. But then each of those has its own like effective pathway within it. So
Sweet.
Yeah, right now it's just the beginning and stuff, but it's a really cool thing that is definitely
Yeah,
like a new chapter in like what we're doing regarding education. So
Well, and that gives you guys the opportunity too to potentially like I don't know where all of your training centers are. I know we have one here.
Los Angeles, San Francisco, which is
about
where we have a
San Francisco.
roastery. We have one in Dallas. We have one in Chicago in the Loop, New York City, Boston, Asheville.
That's so cool.
Yeah, Miami, Washington, D.C., a couple of places. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, that's exciting. And you touched briefly on what it is that you do, but just to kind of get a better overview of your role, that was one of the things that I wanted to hit at
Totally.
the top so that we know exactly kind of.
Yeah, so Counterculture has this fun model where we've got different regions and we work pretty hyper locally within each of those regions, centered around a training center, right? So we have a physical building that is where we do training and where we do sales calls and where we do classes and where we do things open to the public. So we have one of these in Seattle. And so right now I am the entire Seattle region. There's a couple different hats that kind of go into that. So my job is effectively to do new business sales. So I'm out there cold calling coffee shops, which is really super fun because that's actually the new part of my job. I've been with Counterculture for 5.5 years working for them, but I've been working kind of peripheral or with Counterculture Coffees since like 2007, which is kind of nuts. So sales, account management, what else? Education, I'm teaching classes right now. And then just that kind of stuff. So basically anything that anyone in the Seattle region who's going to be drinking Counterculture coffee needs for support. So whether that is a cafe or coffee shop that has new baristas that need to train, or we're trying to track down a package that went awry, or if you're a home consumer and you've got questions about how this coffee works with like the equipment that you have at home, that kind of stuff. It's kind of everything at this point, which is pretty cool. So
Cool.
Yeah, and having worked for Counterculture here in Seattle for, about 6 years, like I've kind of gotten to see a lot of different ways that applies, and then like wear a lot of different hats and sit in different seats and stuff. So it's fun because like in a situation like this, it's like, oh man, like what can we talk about?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's one of the coolest things about, and I think this is true of other food industries as well. I'm only really familiar with coffee, but when you do one job, you kind of, if it's something you end up being passionate about, you kind of end up doing a lot of jobs. Yeah. Because it's just exciting and interesting to kind of to know about.
Yeah.
So like technically it's my job to get people to click on the website, but I'm like really I want to know how every commercial machine that comes through works and how all of the different coffees taste and everything beyond just the basics, because it's fascinating and it's really fun to be able to like connect with other people who are doing other things and feel like there's common language there, which is very exciting.
You can definitely reduce it down to like my job is number of clicks.
Yeah,
and it's
right.
like that doesn't like describe like the way you interact with people.
Right,
Like
exactly.
how you fit within the context of a coffee community and cultures.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that.
So there's, I think probably most of the people listening are familiar with Counterculture, but in terms of like where the roaster came from, early days, I would love to hear, if you have any, like if you have the story.
Yeah. So the company is about 27 years old. We got our start in 1995 in Durham, North Carolina. That's still where the headquarters are, where our main roastery is. We have a secondary roastery that's in Emeryville, California, which takes care of everybody on the West Coast and kind of through the center of the country. Emeryville's like Oakland, Bay Area, right? But the company was originally formed by two people, Brett Smith and Fred Hauk, in 1995. Brett had just finished business school. His friend Fred really liked coffee, was also like a big bird enthusiast. And it's one of these things where you're like, that's kind of like a cheesy kind of start, but that's actually a really great beginning for a coffee company.
It's also true, I won't go on a tangent, but it's true of like practically every roaster that I talk to. There's always like coffee plus another hook, which is awesome.
Yeah. Like it's like this could be a good business and we have a good way to do it is kind of what it is, right? Mm-hmm. So they started a coffee company roasting in 1995, and we had like a line that came out in 1997 called the Sanctuary line. Mm-hmm. And it was like the bird friendly, like shade grown coffee back in 1997, which was a really super cool thing. Fred had a license plate that was Bird Java. I think it was Bird Java. And it's like, we have this photo of it. And it's like, I mean, that's Fred, right? The unfortunate part is that Fred passed away in 2001. And I really think that was like a transformative moment for the entire company. Pretty soon after that, we had codified, like, we are here to be a company that like has pays attention to like sustainability regarding like fiscal sustainability, environmental sustainability, and social sustainability, right? Like that's what this company is here to do. We're going to roast coffee, but like this kind of idea of those three things, fiscal, environmental, and social sustainability being how we're going to do it, I think is in a lot of ways just because it's like, well, Fred wanted a coffee company that like made places safer for birds, right?
Right.
And so that was just something that was a very crystallizing kind of moment. And I think has led to the result of us making a lot of decisions that aren't the best pure business decisions, but are really, really, really in line with the ethos that we want to have in memory of one of our founders.
Sure.
And so that's one of those things where it's kind of a, like having training centers is a weird decision. It would make more sense probably economically to have retail cafes, to go to a counterculture coffee cafe. But it's one of these things where like, the retail, the training center space is just like, well, this is the way that we want to engage with people, right? So it's a fun kind of thing. Yeah, we've got a roastery in Durham. We started building training centers. We had one in Durham, then we had one in Charlotte, then we built one in Asheville, closed the one in Charlotte, and kind of continued around with that model of we will have a small local team that does local support wherever we kind of have one of these training centers. So
yeah, that's awesome. And it's also unique to, I think, when, like Seattle, for example, not everywhere is like this, but I know that Durham, the Raleigh-Durham area is like this, and Seattle is like this, and I don't know much about, like, I would assume Austin is like this, but there's some of these locations are so saturated with cafes and with retail locations where you can go and drink coffee from roasters and it's cool as long as everybody is able to thrive. It's awesome. It's great that there's such variety in a lot of these places, but I think having training centers is a cool sort of different thing to do. It's just like here we have La Marzocco has their sort of, it's like a cafe and training center. Yeah, and that's a unique experience, which is really a cool differentiator, I think. Like, not so much from like a business perspective, but just from a, if you're here, if you want to come to Seattle and check out all the coffee stuff, maybe you stop by the training center, maybe then you go get coffee from Elm, and then you go check out like a latte class at La Marzocco. It's like a way for you to build a full, fun experience rather than it just being hitting a dozen different cafes over a few days.
It's not just a coffee crawl like that.
Yeah.
The La Marzocco space is awesome up in Ballard. So our training center space opened like a year and a half after I started this job, moved here to Seattle for it. And so I kind of did this Harry Potter thing where they had one cabinet where we kept all of our training materials. And La Marzocco has been wonderful to us, in kind of having this space available. So for a year and a half, we taught classes there like 3 days a week up in Ballard, which is pretty nuts. Then we finally graduated into having our own space. It was kind of like, when you stay on a friend's couch for a long time, it's like great friends, but
it's a very cool space too. If people haven't seen, like we were just talking about before we hit record, we did a interview there years ago
our training center
at the training center,
and
and you can go back and find that in our YouTube history. It's very cool. It was awesome to go and see it and everything there. So if you're in the Seattle area, I highly recommend impartially that you go check it out.
It's not like an open door all the time kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
We do right now we have an event once a month, the last Friday of the month called Shift Drink, which is taking place this Friday. And so that's happening from 11 to 2 last Friday of the month, which is kind of an open house and pop-up free cafe where, we don't like charge for anything. We just have a menu board and a QR code. And so you scan the QR code and it's a donation-based kind of thing, whatever you want, give generously. And it goes to a local nonprofit instead. So it's definitely a cool kind of space to check out. But if it's just kind of like a random Tuesday, it's kind of
exactly.
I might be in there, I might not.
You have to kind of look ahead for sure.
Yeah,
definitely. So I guess can you tell me a little bit about like the general roasting philosophy? Like, we have roasters who their thing is super light. We have roasters who their thing is most accessible coffee. Where does counterculture kind of fall on that?
That's a great question. I feel like we would go with what I call an omni roast. And that's a term, I'll be honest, I recently learned because that's an SCA term, right? And I always just said we're kind of in the middle, right? So we're relative medium for everything. I think that, I kind of always walk backwards with this. And it's like, what is the experience we want a customer to have when they drink our coffee? And the experience that we want to have is balance. Balance kind of above everything else is what we shoot for, right? So when in terms of brewing, that's like balanced, like sour, sweet, and bitter, right? Flavors, right? That's balanced texture and balanced weight. And so, and this idea of like, if we can have balance in any brew method, that's the kind of roast profile we want to have pretty much across the board for our coffees, right? So the roast methodology that we take is one, which is pretty much like, how do we roast a coffee so it can be something that can be pretty easily dialed in for any brew method. We have this phrase that we've used for a long time, any coffee, any brew. And I think, if we go back like a decade, it's like, and or even not even that far, we still have like, coffees where it's like, oh, this is meant for espresso. It's like, oh, this one should be a French press, right? And there's definitely like something to be said for that. But I think that kind of separating like the roast profile from the brew method is really something where it's like, I like teaching people, how does your French press affect your brew differently than a pour over, right? That's going to affect texture. It's going to affect, aroma. It's going to affect like a lot of like what flavors you can get just because of filtration and brew method and stuff, right? So having something that works equally well as espresso and as, a pour over and as French press is a tricky kind of thing, right? We definitely have a lot of, there's a lot of tradition in Seattle about like dark roast for espresso, right? Yeah. And those two were synonymous for a long time. What's your espresso roast? That kind of thing. And that was just, you just understood it meant dark roast, that kind of thing. But like, light roasts on espresso are super tasty.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Super floral, right? You get a bigger body and stuff. And it's like creamy texture.
Oh, yeah. That's
it's
my
amazing.
thing for sure.
Yeah, right? And so not to kind of pigeonhole people in like, hey, this one's only meant to be used for AeroPress, but only the inverted method, right?
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
You can get really specific like that to a point. And we honestly just, I think, want coffees to be balanced. So as far as roasting goes, like we definitely look for, development to the point where it's like you can brew this a lot of different ways and have balanced sour, sweet, and bitter flavors and tastes when you're kind of brewing that. So it's meant to be pretty user friendly. Honestly, that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's always been my experience with like I always get excited when we have counterculture coffee for me to take home because I know that I do a mix of different things most mornings. If I'm being honest, and people who listen to the show know that I admit this. I just like hit the button on a super auto and pull a long shot, and that's my coffee for the morning.
The first one is medicinal anyway.
Exactly. That's exactly because I have to get it and then take the dog outside, and then it is a get me in a place where I can pull my shoes on and go outside for 10 minutes kind of thing.
I have the exact same situation.
But then I also have I have a press at home. I have multiple different pour over setups. I've got a drip brewer, and I like to use different methods. So it's always really nice, I think, with counterculture coffee. I don't ever really worry, kind of like you're saying, I don't worry about, am I going to use most of this bag in a super auto or am I going to use it making drip because it all kind of works, which is definitely oddly unique in a way that, we like any roaster that we carry is a roaster that we've vetted and tried and we like their coffee a lot. So, I like every roaster that we carry, but it is kind of unique to have such a, have that balance in so many different brew methods, because in most cases I would very much find the specific brew method that's going to work best for the coffees that come in through the door. And I don't really do that with counterculture because it does just kind of work. Yeah, for sure.
We've got the coffees that are like the year-round ones, the ones that have the fun names like Hologram or Gradient, right? That come in like the individual bag as opposed to the coffee that has like the name of a producer or the name of a co-op, right? And like those are meant to hit like the main categories of like, I'll use like air quotes, like American coffee drinkers. Yeah. So it's like the sweet and mild coffee. You get a big mug and you kind of like shrug your shoulders and you sit on the couch on Saturday morning and have pancakes. We got like one of those coffees, and that one's fast forward, right? And so Apollo is the coffee that's always wash processed coffee from Ethiopia. And so it's always going to be fruity, always going to be floral and stuff. And so we try to kind of like check these major boxes of like, what are the ways that people actually drink coffee? Then we kind of have something that really consistently slots into each of those categories. Because you're right, there's a lot of coffee drinking where it's like, I want to wake up and hit a button and I want to have something that's consistent and I want to have something that fits the flavor profile that I want. But then also being like, no, I actually do want to decide if this is going to be better as the inverted method for an AeroPress. Yeah. Or like whether I should use the paper filter or like, the
for
metal
sure.
filter. So
it's such an interesting, for me, coffee, when I first got into the coffee industry, I thought of coffee very much like I think of beer, which is like, oh, I like these flavor profiles. These are the ones that I like. So I'm going to get those flavor profiles. Now, though, as time has gone on, coffee to me is a lot more like music, which is where I'm like, this is the set for this occasion I want this, and for this occasion I want this. It's much less about what is my favorite flavor, I'm just going to drink that all the time with some variation, and much more about like
a soundtrack.
Yeah, it's and it sounds corny, I know, but it's I think coffee is so different than other kinds of foods in that way, and I think that's why it works to have 12 different cafes in one town, and why it works for us to carry like over 40 roasters and feel confident about all of them is I'm never going to like tell you, oh, well, I'm not going to say Counterculture is better than Camber, because I just don't think about them that way. Just like I don't really think about music in that way at all either. It's very much no, this is what I'm in the mood for this activity or for this time of day or for this general mood. And I think that's really cool.
We kind of look at like coffee, and this is something we've talked about for a while, like as an ingredient. And my background is like food and culinary school and stuff. That's how I had my coffee, first experiences was at culinary school. And so this idea of like coffee being something that you can use a number of different ways and get different results with. Totally. I think beer is one of these things where it's like you open a bottle and that's kind of what you have, right?
Right, yeah.
But being that coffee is unique because the end user, unless you're just going to a cafe, like if you're at home brewing coffee, you are responsible for kind of getting the best out of this, that kind of thing, right? So having something that's accessible and user friendly is really happy in a way versus like something where it's like, you need to be really particular about how this brews, right? Because it's not just this idea of like, coffee being an ingredient, you could make it taste, thicker and more bitter. You can get more spicy flavors and stuff, right? Use a French press, let it brew longer, right? Use less filtration, right? You can definitely accentuate like acidity and clarity, use a Chemex, right? It's gonna be super appley. We're gonna kind of like lean to that direction with any coffee, regardless of what you choose. So
for sure,
it's a really fun thing, kind of like, separating those two and be like teaching people, okay, this coffee is gonna taste like, the flavor notes on the bag for these reasons, right? It's natural processed coffee. It comes from Burundi. It's going to be a little savory. It's going to definitely have some of that like, jammy strawberry stuff. But if you decide to brew it this way, you're going to really accentuate acidity. If you brew it this way, you're going to totally accentuate body. Yeah. Which is just a really fun way to kind of be like, how do you slot this stuff in?
Yeah.
I like that music analogy though. That's a good one.
It's sort of a recent thing I've come to, but it kind of dawned on me. And it dawned on me because I was thinking about, I became aware of people like pairing coffee and music, and my initial reaction to it is like, that's super corny. That is like not something the way I think about it all. But then I started to think about it more, and I was came around to the idea of less that I would personally pair coffee with music, but kind of developing more respect for that idea, and then also the way that I think about coffee is such a similar thing with.
There's a Venn diagram there.
I know, yeah, exactly.
They can totally affect you in similar kind of ways.
Yeah, and
not to say it's gonna be the same for everybody, but
coffee bags are like album art too. So clearly, there's an idea that somebody's got to fully connect the dots on there. So, I kind of piggybacking off of that a little bit. How does Counterculture approach sourcing? Like, is it the sort of thing where you're working the same kind of long-term partnerships, or always like looking for something new, focusing on partners?
Yeah, sourcing is one of the most major parts of like our company identity, the way that we go through like our purchasing principles, right? And this is just the fact where like we look at ourselves within the context of how we affect a lot of different people. Like fun fact, like quiz time, how many people touch a coffee bean on average from, we'll say, being planted to being consumed?
I knew the answer. It's like 40 different
It's like
people?
30 okay. Something, right? Yeah. And so like you're like the 31st person, that kind of idea, right? And so that's a bit of a broad stroke of the brush. And obviously every supply chain is different. But oftentimes the difference between like a really good supply chain and a really bad, a good transparent supply chain that is good for each person in the process, and an opaque kind of like supply chain that takes from everybody in the process, the difference isn't like, exporter, like, because you need an exporter for both, but it's who you choose for that process and how much access to information and communication you kind of get through them, right? So recognizing that oftentimes each individual player is chosen by the coffee roaster. The coffee roaster is the one that effectively like sets all of this stuff up. We're the ones that do the contracts, right? So we will contract a producer or a co-op, we'll contract and it'll go through a certain exporter. There are certain transportation companies that come through that. So every supply chain uses the same named players. It's who those people are and how you interact with them, which is the difference between one that's good and like beneficial and one that's an exploitation of people.
Right, exactly.
And so this is a huge deal because we recognize that this is probably more than anything else how we affect more people around the globe, not just the person who roasts the coffee and turns it brown, not just the person who brews it, not just the person who drinks it, right? So it's that much bigger kind of scope of it, which is a really big deal for us. We love long-term partnerships. We do as much like forward contracting as we can. This is something that gives a lot of monetary security.
Yeah.
I think it's worth recognizing that like everybody in the supply chain is running a business, right?
Yeah.
And I grew up in like South Central Wisconsin, which is farm country. And it's like, you ever seen like a farm like in full operation? Like it's a business. Like, and it's a tricky kind of thing, right? So this idea of like farming and business, like everyone is kind of advocating for their own businesses like that. So the best case scenario is to be able to have a contract that you have year after year after year with the same partners. The longer that we can have relationships with partners, the more back and forth information we have, the more transparency we can effectively get in what our supply chain looks like. And that's really what we look for predominantly.
Yeah.
A lot of the coffees that we get, in a year will be things that are referrals or recommendations from the partners that we kind of already have. We'll get stuff from like a co-op. Be like, hey, here's a neighboring co-op that we work with that we know that you might like. So a lot of it's like referral based like that. But it's one of these things where if it's a coffee that we purchase for a year, we will be asking certain pieces of information of like, not only like what is free on board pricing, which is when we talk about price per pound and stuff, it's usually free on board, which means the price paid when it leaves the country of origin, but like what's farm gate pricing? What's the price that's actually paid when it leaves the farm? And so free on board pricing includes things like transportation and certifications and like cupping labs and stuff like that. But farm gate pricing is like, what do you actually just pay your farmers, right?
Right.
So there's all these pieces of information that we really ask for up front. And if it's a partner who is an exporter or a co-op that can give us this information, that's a green flag that we want to continue a partnership with them.
Right.
If that's not something that they have available, but they can get for us, that's good. But if it's one of these situations where it's like, we don't have that, that's not really a supply chain that we want to engage in.
Sure.
So as far as like purchasing principles and who we like working with, the people that we can work with year after year that are responsive to us trying to push potential as well are the people that we want to work with. It's kind of like coffee farm consulting as well, where there's a lot of suggestions about like, hey, have you tried using this different method of drying these kinds of dry bits? Have you tried changing the water in your fermentation tank after 24 hours or 12 hours as opposed to just having it be the same water? There's lots of little pieces that we can use to try to improve cup quality in coffee, which means it improves price per pound as well. And everyone tastes your coffee. So best case scenario is we get someone that kind of engages with us in that same way that we want to engage with them. And that's just something that you can continue to purchase year after year. And as far as contracts go, they're generally something that puts a lot of confidence, knowing that, because they happen at the beginning of the season, right? They happen like for next year's crop effectively. So even if there is something that's wrong with this, we have something where there's already kind of like a contract. There's a lot of monetary security that comes with that. We also like working with partners where we can buy a lot of different coffees from the same producer. This is that kind of idea of like a working farm. Like it works best if you buy a lot of corn from one farm or from one dairy, this kind of thing. So we'll get like shooting star coffees that are like, crazy high scores and have really fun flavor notes and things. But like only buying those coffees doesn't put food on anyone's table.
Right.
They're really cool and they're super fun and they're really exciting. And we love having them. We've got like black box, kind of coffees that we have or like tiny little sets and things. But best case scenario is that we can buy a lot of different kinds of coffee from one producer. It fills up like a shipping container a lot better, and it's a much more holistic way of supporting effectively what is a working farm than just buying like, hey, this is the coolest 97-point coffee that you've ever seen, and it's $100 a pound and stuff, and we've got 30 pounds of it. So it's kind of what is a holistic way of supporting someone who's literally like, running a working farm kind of thing is a way of thinking about that.
Yeah, I think that the business side of it for a lot of these producers is something that obviously conditions and pricing has improved as people have just started to even consider the people on the other end of the equation. I mean, for decades, it was just not
commodity.
It was just a commodity. Yeah. There wasn't a personal aspect to it at all. But I think that still there's an interesting parallel too. And it kind of goes back to talking about the kind of coffees that people want and the way that their habits in drinking them. Those super niche, unique coffees are going to be really exciting for kind of the amount of people that can purchase them. Mm-hmm. But then the coffee that's really going to be the thing that changes most people's day is going to be the one that you can source a lot of and have available in the year-round coffees or in a single origin that's available for a longer period of time. So I think that makes sense that it kind of goes both ways, that those are the ones that offer the most sustainable pricing and stuff for the producers as well, which is interesting. And I think gets to, some of our most popular coffee is Lavazza Coffee, right? Like that's coffee that the people who are buying $97.100 a pound coffee would probably scoff at Lavazza Coffee. But what it comes down to is that for a lot of people, it is just sort of what is the best compromise between price, flavor profile, and making it accessible that exists. So
consistency is a big deal.
It is, yeah.
Consistency is huge.
Yeah. And I think it's especially when you're using brew methods, whether it's a super auto or drip brewing or even a press or something like that, that consistent. For those of us who, for a while, when I felt like I had more time to dedicate to it, I would make pour over every morning. And that was like, if I could just have a different coffee every day, that'd be great, because that's what it's all about with that brew method. But I think that consistency becomes more and more important as you your time starts to fill up, and having that pour over becomes more of a leisure activity than part of your morning routine.
Yeah. I hear that.
Well, that covers a lot of the sort of coffee and sourcing and roasting and brew methods and stuff. But I'm curious, for you personally, is there anything from Counterculture's past, like, obviously every coffee's good, but like classic Counterculture roasts that really get you?
This part isn't going to that got me. I feel like my aha moment coffee was Edito sun-dried. So Edito is a co-op that's in Yirgacheffe, southwestern Ethiopia, birthplace of coffee, right? We buy a lot of coffee from them throughout the year. And so Edito sun-dried was the first coffee that made me go, oh my gosh, I didn't know coffee could taste like this.
Yeah, sure.
I did the United States Barista competition for a number of times. Did really well in 2012, made it to the finals. And my signature beverage was basically trying to recreate that kind of experience, where it was like a drink that had strawberries and pomegranates and barley malt and like cold brew, or actually flash brew, and then it was a soda. It was super tasty. But it's one of these things where I feel like more than anything else, when I talk to like coffee professionals or people who have done this for a long time, and it's like, well, like, what coffee made you be like, oh, coffee's different than just, push a button? It's usually some sort of natural or sun-dried processed coffee, or it's a Kenyan coffee, which is really interesting. So those coffees are always the ones that kind of stand out. But it's a really interesting thing going through this business where you have these kind of like, you'll kind of like what you're talking about, Pat, where it's like you'll change like, I just want to make coffee today, that kind of thing, right? And so there's a coffee that actually brought one here, so it's not going to translate for radio, but called Lago Landrina, which is a coffee that we've been purchasing now for 16 years or so. When I was in culinary school, and we switched from Illy to Counterculture at the school that I went to, and I went through all their classes and stuff. I remember Cindy Chang, who was the director of development for Counterculture, making this little flyer, like she was designing it, right?
That's so cool.
This was 2007, and so I actually brought this, which is a little advertising sheet that we've got from I think it's probably from the early 2000s, of Lago Landrina, which is a coffee from Colombia that we've been purchasing forever. It's Colombia, so we get a fly crop. We get 2 crops a year out of it. We sell more of that coffee than anything else. But I feel like Lago Landrina, and then I've got the 2022 version of it there too.
Yeah, that's so cool.
To be drinking the same coffee for it's like that many years, I just love it.
Not to harp on it, but it's so cool to me because that regardless of, I don't know what their turnover rates at the farm itself are, but there's probably people in that organization still that were there then and that are there now, and it's like their life's work to continue to bring this coffee. So I think that's like the most exciting part about the whole process for me, is the people that have been doing this for so long. And it's like, we were talking a little earlier about $100 a pound bags of coffee, and to me at that point it's kind of like and really this extends to all coffee, not just the super expensive ones. You're kind of buying art as much as you're buying a consumable product, which is really awesome. I think it's super exciting.
I really do enjoy being able to be like, oh yeah, remember Finca El Puente in 2008, back when we used to call it the Purple Princess? And it's like, you see how like flavors have changed with coffee because of climate change and because of different varieties being the things that are interesting. We had this big splash from geishas in like the mid 2000s, 2010s and stuff. And so We're at this point now where a lot of the plants that were planted in 2010, 11, 12, like, because it takes 5 years or so to start getting fruit, like we're getting a lot of these, like, like plants producing and things. It's just really fun to kind of see like how these have changed over the years and how like, yeah, we definitely think about and talk about what coffees can be very differently than we did in 2010. So
Sure.
it's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Not to sort of take a negative turn on it, but what do you think are the biggest challenges that are going to kind of surface, that less from a doom and gloom perspective, but more of a like that counterculture is thinking of and ways to support and work around?
It's a great question. And honestly, like the doom and gloom ones, I feel like we know that like COVID and supply chain is a big issue right now. And
right.
It's been for years, right? A shipping container costs 8 times, what it did 2 years ago, that kind of thing, right? And everything on that supply chain is just harder, right? So that is something that everyone is currently still aware of. I feel like the things we talked about 2 years ago would be reduced arable land for coffee due to climate change, right? Coffee effectively grows best, coffee Arabica, like on the side of a mountain at a certain bandwidth based on altitude, which is temperature effectively. And as climate change happens, it moves further up the mountain, which just means that it has less arable land there, right? So it's a combination of less arable land and then also urbanization, which means that second generation, or I guess I'll just say next generation, there is a lot of people who don't stay in farmland areas doing what their parents have done. They move to urban areas. And that's me. I grew up in South Central Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Here I am in Seattle,
me too,
Yeah, right. So it's just a kind of thing where it's like, yeah, we want urban lives, like, and so we want fun restaurants and cocktail bars and jazz lounges and stuff, right? We want Pike Place Market, but that's different than like staying on like a farm and kind of continuing that. So those are the kind of things where like, I think that we're looking at all those things ahead. I will say though that the coffee industry is super ahead of a lot of other agricultural industries.
Yeah.
Things like the HEMA Agricultural Research Center, which was an organization in Kenya in like the 70s that did a lot of variety research and did a lot of research into like getting ahead of things like, coffee leaf rust or coffee berry disease, right? So we have a bunch of like plants around the world, not we meaning counterculture, but like the specialty coffee industry. Where it's like different variety research is honestly something that's amazing. We counterculture work really well with World Coffee Research. Brett Smith, counterculture's president, founder, is on the board of World Coffee Research. And so it's a kind of like pre-competitive organization where a lot of places like donate and contribute to it. But World Coffee Research is the kind of thing where like there's a lot of advancements being made for the agricultural part of the specialty coffee industry to make it like more hardy, to make it more sustainable within itself. So there's a lot of actual good stuff that happens with it, and new varieties taste great. Like it's really fun seeing these kind of things. So bunch of fun stuff like that. So yeah,
I feel like I guess 3 years ago, the thing that as I was becoming more aware and kind of getting educated on the sort of state of coffee globally with producers, like coffee leaf rust was the big one that seemed like it was the big scary bad, but it seems like in the time since then, so much work has already been done to kind of combat those things that it is more the sort of common issues that is affecting agriculture and frankly just every industry. That is the thing, which is good to hear, as scary as some of those things are, that the industry is so good at preempting a lot of the more specific concerns that arise.
There's been a lot of work done decades before where we are now, and not to minimize like the extent of damage when you have all of a sudden your lowest elevation farm kind of gets wiped out because the fact that at this point the fungus can thrive there, but it couldn't 30 years ago, that kind of thing. But it is something where there's been a bunch of work that's been put into this already. And it's really impressive to kind of see that, I think.
Yeah, I would encourage people who are listening to kind of do a little bit of research on, it's a fascinating thing to learn about the conservation efforts that are done to prevent that too. Yeah. We don't have enough time, obviously, to talk about all of it here, but it's a whole angle of the coffee industry that I wasn't aware of before I started to really dig deep on it, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, go check out the HEMA Agricultural Research Center, the JARC, and it's a really cool kind of organization that's in Ethiopia that did a lot of stuff in the 70s. So
yeah. Well, before we go, we used to go talk to roasters at locations before the pandemic started, and the thing I always asked at the end of those interviews was, if you dream scenario, what is your favorite as specific as you want to be, what is your favorite kind of favorite coffee drink to make and consume?
Oh man, so you're talking about music, and it's one of these things where I feel like there's a different thing for different situations.
Totally,
like,
yeah.
Most of my coffee growing stuff was in New York or Washington D.C. especially, and on the East Coast, coffee means like drip coffee. Like I would want to just have like I've got a Breville Precision Brewer at home, and like we have a coffee called Hologram, which is effectively like 1/3 natural process Ethiopian, 2/3 Central South American, washed I would drink that 9 months out of the year until we get to our holiday blend, which is just like a flatter version of that. Like,
Yes, yeah.
Like I would drink that every single day.
No, I love that coffee.
Except for the fact that I'll out myself. Like I drink a 1/3 decaf now. We were talking about this beforehand, where it's like I break all my own rules at home.
I really should start doing that, because now it's like every year I notice that, oh wait, the number of cups of coffee I'm drinking in the morning is going up by one like every year, and it's not really sustainable.
Right?
I would like to continue to be able to do this job and drink coffee for 10 more years, and I don't know if 15 cups of coffee is going to be good.
I really do love washed Ethiopian coffees too, like that, like lemony, floral, citrus, honey, kind of like iced tea, like tea kind of thing. Like I definitely love that, hot or cold. That would be like an afternoon kind of thing. I feel like I could pretty much just live on coffees like Apollo and Hologram. That's what I would do.
Yeah.
I'm super, that would make me happy.
Yeah.
I would love to obviously have like, if I could somehow get like a Lamazza Linea PB at home, I would do that.
Sure.
If I could just move my training center into my home,
there you
that's
go.
what I would do. But it's impractical. There's just not enough room on my counter. There's just a lot of
feel
money
that,
spent on energy.
and
I
also
won't do that.
it's like I think this question is fun because it's down to interpretation, because like my ideal cup of coffee would also involve not having to do anything for the rest of the day and being able to just like focus on making it, spend a half an hour on the perfect cup of coffee in the morning, and then have 3 hours where I can just read a book and enjoy drinking the coffee. And
I wish that for both of us.
yes.
I get that periodically, that kind of thing. Also, just Kalita. I guess I'd say I'd have to have a Kalita.
Yeah.
That's usually my go-to pour over. So
Yeah, I'm a V60 guy, but I like Kalita pretty much just as much.
Totally.
I'll take either of them.
I feel like if you, maybe this is like the wrong thing to say, but I feel like if you brewed a Kalita and a V60 and you were like, which one's which, Travis? I don't know if I could tell you.
I wouldn't be able to either.
As an educator, that is my definition of like, is this like something I need to like push for? It's like, it's like if I can't tell the difference between an input of 18.5 and 18.6, I don't expect that it matters.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
You have to have some flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we also talked about this earlier. I think that that's a big piece for me kind of going forward in the way that I'm not specifically an educator, but with the content that we produce in video form, this podcast, in written form, is to try to get people more in the mindset of like our slogan or whatever is "Make coffee you love," and that it has meaning to us, right? Like it's very much you can sort of do whatever you want and whatever you enjoy, and that's the whole process of like, maybe for you, your enjoyment is due in part to the ease of making it. Maybe it is actually like kind of being really detail oriented with the process. Maybe it's as simple as pouring cold brew out of a pitcher from the refrigerator. Like all of that stuff is important, and I think that there is no like best way to do any of this. There is no single best machine or best cup of coffee, and so trying to impart that and get rid of the term like coffee snob from everyone's vocabulary.
Stomp it out.
Exactly. Yeah. Is kind of the way that we want to be. So
I'm super aligned with all of that.
Yeah.
You're the one drinking it. I want it to taste good to you.
Yeah,
so.
exactly.
And I'll do my best to teach you to make it the way you want it.
Well, thank you so much for coming in to do this episode. This has been awesome. Very exciting conversation.
Yeah, this was great. I appreciate this.
And thanks everybody for listening to the show. Obviously, all the ending spiel stuff. Go check out the blog, check out our YouTube channel, check out our socials. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit your favorite podcast app. We're, I think, on pretty much all of them. So if you find one that we're not on, you can send it to questions@seattlecoffeegear.com, which is also where you can send any questions for the podcast. We will see you next time. Thanks again.